Millions of people around Australia are stuck in lockdown, but some are using the extra time to retrain or upskill with fee-free courses. In New South Wales, more than 120,000 people have enrolled since the joint federal-state JobTrainer initiative was first introduced in October. But there are some concerns about whether enough jobs will be available once lockdowns end. Matt Grudnoff is a senior economist at the Australia Institute and he joins me now from Canberra. Matt, thank you. To what extent are people taking up this training, showing interest, having maybe lost their job or looking for this extra time that they have to upskill in a job that they currently have?
Yeah, I certainly think there are more people who are looking into this. This is a great opportunity when they're locked down to invest in skills that they might have been doing for a while now. I think that people who are expecting to go back to their jobs perhaps aren't necessarily thinking about training, but certainly if you were thinking about sort of moving on to a new job or you don't think your job will be there after the pandemic, then this is a great time for people to upskill and do particularly online courses.
Are there any particular industries that are standing out for those who have been in those industries that are now upskilling, or the industries that they are looking to upskill in?
Well, I think that people who are in industries that have been particularly badly impacted by the lockdown, things like retail, things like hospitality, those kind of industries will probably see a lot more people looking for upskilling. And I think they're probably going to be looking for jobs in industries that are more secure. So a lot of the people that have been losing their jobs or been standing down, and particularly those that are worried that the jobs won't be there when they get back, people who are in kind of precarious work, casuals, part-time, people with insecure work, people who don't have leave entitlements. And they're probably going to be looking at skilling into areas where they're more likely to get that permanent jobs, those jobs with paid leave entitlements.
Mm-hmm. Do you welcome this upskilling or do you have concerns with it?
Oh, look, broadly, training that's free by the government is a good thing. It allows people to become more productive in the economy. It allows them to move into higher paying, more secure jobs. The problem is that if that free training or the training more generally is in kind of, you pay for a piece of paper, but it doesn't really give you many skills. And particularly we've seen in the vocational education sector, the private providers in recent years have kind of focused on those sort of things, then they're not going to really help people upskill. They're just going to give them another piece of paper. It's not necessarily the skills that people are looking for. And I have concerns that all that will do is waste the government's money, or if they're not free, it will just load up the unemployed and those that are looking for more work with more debt.
So what would you say the key things for people to consider before they take on any of these courses, be them paid or free?
Well, I think they need to look at whether or not these are the kind of courses that are going to give them the jobs or the skills, to get the jobs that they're after. And I think there's a real role for government in this. The government has spent decades, governments have spent decades kind of defunding TAFE, which used to be the cornerstone of vocational education. And they were able to liaise with businesses to find out the kind of skills that were needed and focus attention on those. But unfortunately, the public sector has been rather underfunded, and we've had the private sector, which really hasn't taken up that slack at all. As I said, they've been more often been involved in kind of just sort of courses that aren't particularly useful. So I think certainly there's a role for government here to fund TAFE better. And also there's a role for government around making sure that students and people who want to retrain don't live in poverty when they have to do it. So I think particularly now when governments are asking people to stay home, there's a strong incentive for governments to provide financial support when people are reskilling. But I think after the pandemic, what we need to do is focus on getting people out of poverty when they're training. People shouldn't have to choose between getting better skills and a better job, but living in poverty for a while versus staying in a job that perhaps they don't like, perhaps they're not particularly good at, or perhaps they're not particularly utilising their skills particularly well, but in order to stay out of poverty.
So, I mean, you mentioned there extra funding for TAFE, which I know a lot of people would welcome if that were on the cards, but are you also calling for stimulus measures in terms of economy-wide, once the pandemic is over, for people to perhaps move into these jobs if there is a need for them?
Yeah, absolutely. We often focus on the supply side of labour, that is giving people who are unemployed or underemployed the necessary skills to go out and find jobs. But we completely ignore, we don't give enough attention to the demand side. That is, are there enough jobs out there? It doesn't matter how skilled the unemployed and underemployed are. If there aren't enough jobs there, they're never going to find those jobs. And it's real important for the government to do this through, for example, stimulus. At the moment, the government's not encouraging us to particularly go out, particularly in areas that are locked down. But when the pandemic finishes, I think there's a real role for government to switch its focus from just thinking about the kind of skills and focusing on the unemployed, getting the skills to get jobs, to focusing also on making sure that there are enough jobs out there. And you know, we've seen throughout, you know, for decades and decades, there has never been enough jobs for all of the unemployed. And the government really needs to focus on that demand side, making sure that there are enough jobs in the economy to take up the unemployed.
Matt Grudnoff, Senior Economist at the Australia Institute. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.